Movie opens with some instruction written on the walls, where a name is also written, Roy Freeman. Then we see Roy Freeman, who is sick. Every instruction is written for him on his daily essentials. He is suffering from Alzheimer's. He has lost his memories. He got a glimpse of some memories, but he is unable to recognize it. It looks like he has gone through a surgery. He gets a phone call from a lady. She tells her name Emily Dietz. She says she works for Clean Hand Project and she advocates for inmates. Roy asks what it is about. She says regarding your old cases. In next scene we see Roy meets Emily. Emily tell about ISAC Samuel. ISAC Samuel was convicted in the Professor Joseph Weider murder at Waterford College 10 years ago and scheduled to be executed end of next month. Roy didn't recognize him and asked what's he got to do with him. Emily says ISAC requested to talk with the detective whom he spoke at the night of his confession. Roy asked, "Did I interrogated him?" Emily says, "Yes, with your partner." Roy comes back to his home. Because of Emily, he searches for his true identity and finds a box. He finds his badge, his gun, some photographs, and the case file of ISAC Samuel. Then he visits to ISAC Samuel in prison. Roy says to ISAC that Emily, a lady from Clean Hands Project, told that you wanted to talk to me. ISAC says that he is innocent. He didn't kill Joseph Weider. But Roy says you confessed at the first time, and now you are saying that you are innocent. ISAC says at the night of murder, he was so strung out. Roy and his partner threatened him, hammered him all night, and asked to admit it. So he accepted it at that time out of fear. Roy asked him then what he was doing there. ISAC told him that Joseph once sent him to prison for this. ISAC's son turned away from him. So he went to Joseph to fix this. ISAC told that he waited for his caretaker to leave, and he went inside, but then someone else came in and killed Joseph. ISAC also said that he panicked and he left before he could see who it was. Roy thinks it's all a lie. ISAC says, "I know you don't believe me. Then ask Richard Finn, he would tell you." Roy says, "I don't remember him. You have to remind me about him." ISAC tells him that Finn is a writer who is writing some books about murder. Roy says that he is sorry because he is not in the position to get involved into this. But ISAC says you are already involved because you were there when I confessed. I already paid the price for my sins, and if you don't make it right, then I will be dead for the crime which I haven't committed. In next scene, we see Roy is trying to memorize his memory and keeping his mind engaged as the doctors told him to do. Then he saw Richard Finn written in his notebook. Roy searches ISAC case file and finds the name Richard Finn is mentioned there, and the signing officer was Jimmy Remus. Next scene is about Jimmy Remus. Roy visits to Jimmy. Jimmy is very happy to see him. Roy tells him about his Alzheimer and his medication. He also says that everything seems new to him because he lost his memory. Jimmy felt very bad about Roy because they had great time together, which Roy doesn't remember. Jimmy asks Roy, "So what brings you up?" Roy says about their old case of Joseph Weider and the accused ISAC Samuel, and tell everything about the conversation held in prison. Jimmy says that every criminal denies his crime when their death is near. But Roy says ISAC was very convincing. Roy says that he looked the file where Richard Finn is mentioned. His fingerprints were all over the place, but there is no details about him. So I think we should go and talk to him. Jimmy agrees. Next day, when Roy was looking into some photographs, Jimmy called him and says he found Richard Finn. In next scene, we see Richard Finn is dead due to overdose of drugs and his body is in morgue. Roy gets glimpses of past, and he says to Jimmy that he was there when we were investigating. Jimmy says, "But now you can't interrogate the dead." Roy says, "But they do leave clue behind." On the Richard's funeral, Roy asked his brother about Richard. His brother said that he was writing a book, and he gives the notes to Roy, which he found on his apartment, and also says he was not into drugs, but he was agitated and paranoid. Roy comes to his home, and he studied Richard's notes for his book, The Book of Mirrors. Next scene is about Richard Finn. According to his book, we see Richard is in a party where he meets Laura Baines. Laura Baines is a scholar. She is helping Professor Joseph Weider on his research. Richard and Laura came closer and had a relationship. One day when they were together, Richard's mom called him and said that his father died and she is not able to afford his room and board. Laura wanted to help. That's how he first met Professor Joseph Weider. Joseph asked Richard about his work, and he says he wants to be a novelist. Then Joseph tells about his research, which was based on people's trauma. And he says that Laura told him about his father's death and his financial conditions. After that, he offers Richard $500 a week to organize his book and classify them electronically. Richard started his work for Joseph. He started getting a little suspicious about Laura and Joseph's relationship. One day he finds out Laura and Joseph is getting intimate. Next day Richard was working, then Joseph arrived. He invited Richard for the lunch. Joseph asked him, "How's the things going between you and Laura?" Richard said that they are just friends. First Joseph told him, "Don't be shy. You two will be a good couple." Then he said, "I hired you to help me, not to make things complicated. So you must stop meeting Laura." That night Richard went to Laura to tell about what Joseph told him. But Laura was not there, she was gone. Next morning Joseph Weider found dead. And later Richard found that Laura Baines went to Susan Avery a week before the murder to claim ownership over Weider's work. After Joseph's death, she disappeared. Next scene is about Laura Baines. We see Roy and Jimmy are talking. Roy says that he studied Richard's notes, The Book of Mirrors, and he also tells Jimmy about Laura Baines. Roy says there is no any information about this woman. No social media accounts, no identity proof, nothing. Just an old photograph. Roy says that he is going to Richard's ex-wife. She might know something. Jimmy says, "Why you are so worried?" ISAC confessed his crime. Roy says if he is innocent and we have put away the wrong guy, that's a chance for us to make it right. Roy went to Richard's ex-wife and asked, did she know anything about Richard's death? She says that, "I know he was up to many things, but he was not into drugs." She blamed a girl named Elizabeth Westlake for Richard's death. Richard's ex-wife didn't saw her. She didn't know anything about Elizabeth, except her name, because she heard Richard arguing her. Roy came back and Googled Elizabeth. An image result showed the picture of Laura Baines. Laura Baines changed her identity. Roy tracked down Elizabeth. Elizabeth, or Laura, she saw Roy and she greeted him and asked him about his accident. Roy says, "Had we met before?" Laura says yes, a very long time ago. Roy said sorry because he didn't remember and asked her about Richard Finn. Laura says that she didn't want to talk about him because she was tired of him. Richard stalked her, she says, and she said that she has an important meeting where she has to go. Roy tells that Richard thought that she is connected to the Joseph murder, and also tells him that Richard is also dead. Laura seems to be shocked by listening Richard's death. Roy gave him Richard's notes and says to study it. And after your meeting, we should talk. Next scene is about Wayne Devereaux. He was the caretaker of Joseph Weider. Roy visits to him. He is living outside the town. Wayne says, "Roy, it's been a long time. How are you?" Roy didn't remember that he met him before. Roy asked him about Joseph. Wayne says he was homeless and suffering from trauma. Joseph gave him job and also helped him to overcome from trauma. Joseph was working on the project on people's trauma, by testing a medication he developed. Wayne told Roy that he was a perfect candidate for testing. Wayne was going to city, so Roy asked him to drop to his house. While going, Roy asked him about Richard and Laura, and about Joseph's connection with these two, on which Wayne tells Richard was a simple man. Joseph gave him job. Laura and Joseph was more than colleagues. Joseph had many affairs. He had physical relation with every woman who came to visit him. Joseph used to record their intimate moments by old-school camcorder. The day when Joseph was killed, Richard had an argument with Joseph and Laura. Wayne dropped him in his house, and we see Wayne called someone and told him that Roy is in his house. Now we see Roy is observing case files where he finds some of the suspects' files have only the signature of Jimmy Remus, and others have signature of both Jimmy and Roy. Suddenly someone knocks the door. It was Laura. On the other hand, we see Jimmy is keeping an eye from a car. Roy asked Laura about the notes he gave her. Laura denies it by saying it's all bullshit. She also denies everything about her as a suspect. She also denied what Wayne said about her. And she leaves. That night, while Roy was going to buy some stuff, a man tried to run his car over him. But Roy shot him to defend himself. The man was Wayne. Roy informed cops about this incident and get arrested. Jimmy came for him, and by the CCTV camera it was confirmed as the act was of self-defense. Later, Jimmy and Roy went to a bar. Roy asked Jimmy that we have worked together in every case we co-signed, but why in this Joseph case there is only your signature on every paper? On ISAC confession, on suspect's interrogation, on charge sheets and all, only your signature. Jimmy says, "So now you are accusing me, Roy?" And he leaves. Roy is very stressed. He drinks like hell despite the doctor's warning. He is very confused and trying to recall his memory. Next scene, we see he wakes up in Roadside and has a name on his notebook. Diane Lynch. Diane was one of the Joseph's client who was suffering from trauma. Roy visits to a bar where she used to visit. There he finds a man and asks him about Diane. But the man said that she died 5 years ago. Roy feels hopeless. Suddenly, Susan Avery, the woman where Laura went to claim her ownership over Weeder's work, called Roy and says that she has some information about Laura. Roy visits to her. Susan says that when Laura came and claimed about the ownership, Susan denied, but Laura somehow managed to copy Joseph's work and published it by her new name, Elizabeth Westlake. Susan also tells Roy that it is very common to copy others' hard work for money and fame. And in this case, owner is dead and there's no one to point a finger at Laura. Roy asks Susan, "Can you please show me Joseph's house?" Susan agrees and she gave the keys of his house. Roy visits Joseph's house. He had the glimpses of murder night. He started searching his house for any clue. Roy recalls that the murder weapon was a bat. There he also finds a shovel. Out of curiosity, he started searching the garden as he recalled something. He dug out the bat. Suddenly Laura came and asked him, "So you are getting your memory back?" Roy says, "You put the bat here." Then we see Jimmy arrives. He has a gun in his hand. Jimmy says, "You both get inside." Jimmy says, "Why you are so stubborn, Roy? I told you to let it go." Roy asked, "What did you do, Jimmy?" Jimmy says, "I cleaned this mess, Roy, 10 years ago. Don't you remember any of this? It was all about Diane." Then Laura says she was Joseph's patient. She had trauma. Jimmy told Laura to shut up. "I told you I would take care of this." Roy now realized that Jimmy and Laura know each other. Then Roy says, "Now I know you both are together in this murder." Roy says to Jimmy, "I get it, Jimmy. Your wife got really sick. You got deep in debt. She comes along, pays you to kill Joseph so she can publish her book. You sent Wayne to kill me. You killed Richard too. And you railroad ISAC Samuel to cover it all up." Laura gave her excuse that she is not into this. She was not with him. She was facing losing years of clinical research. She met him after Roy accident. Jimmy finds out that I went to Susan to claim my ownership because it was my work, not Joseph's. And Richard told him that I killed Joseph. So Jimmy Blake mailed me. Then Jimmy shouted on her to shut up. and said to Roy that she is lying. She copied Joseph's work. She killed him. Richard found out about this, so she got Wayne to kill him. She thought that she may caught, so she sent Wayne to kill you. She is a manipulator. She is manipulating you. Then suddenly, Laura shot Jimmy and points the gun towards Roy. Then Jimmy shot her, and they both died. Roy told everything to department. Laura Baines was the woman behind both murders. ISAC Samuel declared innocent and was released. Next scene is about Roy Freeman. Roy Freeman was a cop. He had a car accident and lost his memory. He suffered from Alzheimer's. He was in medication. He had glimpses of his past. Slowly he started recovering and regaining his memory. One day he finds his photograph with his wife. The woman on the photograph was Diane Lynch. She was his wife. Now Roy remembered everything. Diane Lynch was suffering from trauma. So she went to Joseph meet her. Joseph and Diane start getting closer. Joseph built a physical relation with her and recorded their intimate moment. Laura wanted to frame Joseph because she wanted the ownership of his work. So she gave Roy Diane's record. Roy saw the record. Roy couldn't bear this. Roy visited Joseph's house. Took the bat. He brutally beaten Joseph to death. Jimmy arrived there, and he was very surprised by seeing this all. He cleaned this all mess to save Roy. He buried the murder weapon under the ground. Jimmy just paid the price for his friendship. In last scene, we see Roy is very guilty. He takes his gun out to kill himself. And the movie ends here.